Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I know many of you enjoy using these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. The day had begun like any other, with the familiar routine of a morning coffee and a brisk walk through the neighborhood. I was eager to return to the comfort of my home, a sanctuary from the chaos of work and daily life. As I approached my front door, something felt off. A faint, uncomfortable draft caught my attention. My heart skipped a beat when I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Quickening my pace, my mind raced with unsettling possibilities. The lock, usually so dependable, was broken. The secure barrier I trusted had been forced open, leaving the door swinging gently on its hinges. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sense of violation was immediate and overwhelming. Hands trembling, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher, calm and reassuring, advised me to stay outside and wait for the police. As I stood on the porch, anxiety gripped me. Who could have done this? Why would someone target my home? The questions spun in my mind, unanswered. The wait felt eternal, though it was only minutes before the flashing lights of a police car illuminated the street. The officers conducted a thorough search of the house, inspecting every room and corner with care. They documented the broken lock, the forced entry, and collected potential evidence, including fingerprints. Despite their diligent efforts, they found no one inside. Beyond the broken lock, there were no signs of forced entry elsewhere, no visible damage, and no intruders hiding within. Once the police finished their inspection, I cautiously stepped inside. My sanctuary now felt foreign, as if it no longer belonged to me. Walking through the house, I began to notice subtle, yet unsettling changes. Personal items had been moved or tampered with. Photographs that once adorned the walls were askew, and some were missing from their frames entirely. In the bedroom, my jewelry box had been rummaged through. The delicate pieces, once neatly arranged, were scattered, with several missing. A wave of nausea hit me as the reality of the intrusion settled in. A wave of unease washed over me as I fully grasped the reality. Someone had rifled through my most personal possessions, exploring the intimate details of my life. I moved to the kitchen, where the disarray was immediately apparent. Drawers and cabinets had been opened, their contents shuffled into chaos. The typically tidy space was a mess, utensils misplaced, dishes askew, and even the pantry disturbed. Food items were out of place, some seemingly inspected or handled. The living room was no better. My bookshelves, once meticulously organized, were in shambles, with books pulled out and stacked haphazardly. Small electronics, like the television remote, had been moved from their usual spots. It felt as though someone had systematically gone through every room, purposefully touching and examining everything. The police officers regrouped with me to share their findings. They reassured me that their investigation would continue and recommended I make a detailed inventory of missing items. They also suggested reviewing any security footage should I have a camera system. I nodded numbly, but their words brought little comfort. The sense of violation hung heavy, overshadowing their reassurances. As the officers departed, I was left alone with the stark reality of the intrusion. Methodically, I began cataloging missing items and assessing the disarray. Each misplaced object felt like a personal affront, a reminder that someone had crossed into my private world and tampered with my life. The emotional toll was immediate and profound. My home, once a place of solace, now felt tainted. It was no longer a refuge, but a space filled with anxiety and unease. The thought of someone moving through my sanctuary, unseen but tangible, left me with a lingering sense of vulnerability. In the days that followed, I worked to restore a sense of normalcy. The lock was repaired and a new security system installed. These measures brought some comfort, but they were no cure for the unease that gripped me. I became hypervigilant, obsessively locking and rechecking doors and windows. Any unusual sound or movement sent my heart racing. The police investigation continued, but without concrete evidence or leads, progress was slow. I was left to navigate the aftermath alone, grappling with the emotional wounds the intrusion had left behind. The sense of safety I once felt in my home was gone, replaced by a persistent undercurrent of fear. Each day became a quiet battle to reclaim my peace, but the scars of that day lingered, a constant reminder of how fragile the feeling of security can be. Amidst the lingering shadows of the intrusion, I was left with a haunting reminder that my sanctuary had been violated by an unknown and unsettling presence. The experience had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The breach of my personal space left an indelible mark on my psyche, a constant reminder of the fragility of security and the profound impact of having one's most intimate spaces invaded. It served as a stark lesson in vulnerability, highlighting how elusive true safety can be, even in the places we hold most dear. Story 2. The park across from my apartment had always been my refuge, a place where I found solace. Evenings spent walking along its paths, watching the city lights shimmer on the pond, were a cherished escape from the chaos of daily life. It was a space where I could unwind, clear my mind, and simply breathe. But one evening, something changed. I noticed a man sitting on a park bench directly across from my apartment. At first, I thought little of it. He was an older man, dressed simply in a grey coat with a fedora tilted at an angle, seemingly lost in his own world. He looked like any other park visitor. Over time, however, I began to notice a pattern. Every evening, without fail, he would be there, sitting on that same bench at the same time. It became an unspoken part of my routine to see him as I left my apartment and headed to the park. What unsettled me wasn't just his constant presence, but it was the way he seemed to watch me that unsettled me most. His gaze felt precise, almost calculated, as though he was tracking my every movement. Even though we never exchanged words, I couldn't shake the feeling of being closely observed. His eyes, obscured beneath the shadow of his fedora, appeared to follow me wherever I went within the park, a quiet, invasive presence that gnawed at my sense of peace. One chilly autumn evening, I decided I'd had enough. The creeping paranoia had grown unbearable, and I resolved to confront him directly. I walked up to the bench where he sat, his gaze fixed ahead, seemingly oblivious to my approach. As I stood in front of him, he slowly turned his head, meeting my eyes with an unnerving calm. "Excuse me," I began, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "I've noticed you sitting here every day. It feels like you're watching me. Is there a reason for that?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable but oddly serene. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "I'm just watching over you," he said, his voice soft and measured. "Sometimes people need a guardian, even if they don't know it." A chill ran through me. His words, intended or not, only deepened my discomfort. The idea that someone would claim to be watching over me, especially in such a covert and invasive way, was deeply unsettling. I wanted to press him for answers, to demand an explanation, but the intensity of his gaze froze the words in my throat. His demeanor was unnervingly composed, as though my unease was irrelevant, or perhaps exactly what he expected. Unable to continue, I mumbled something vague about needing to go and walked away, relief and anxiety washing over me in equal measure. That night, I couldn't escape the sensation of his eyes on me, even in the safety of my apartment. Though he wasn't physically present, his presence lingered in my mind, leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't continue living like this. I began making arrangements to move to a new apartment, telling no one the real reason for my decision. I feared my friends and family would dismiss my concerns as overreaction or paranoia. Instead, I framed it as a simple desire for a change of scenery. The process of packing and organizing became a welcome distraction, something to focus on as I tried to push away the unease that had taken root. The thought of leaving that unsettling presence behind filled me with a sense of urgency. The move was both exhausting and exhilarating, a fresh start in a different part of the city, far from the park and the man who had intruded on my sense of security. I clung to the hope that this change would finally help me shed the lingering feeling of being watched. The first few nights in my new apartment were peaceful. I settled in, enjoyed the fresh surroundings, and began to relax. Yet, despite the change in environment, the unease lingered. That persistent sense of being observed clung to me, even when I was alone. The anxiety that had plagued me in my old apartment seemed to have followed me, like a shadow that refused to fade. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was the residue of paranoia that had built up over months of unease. I'd been so attuned to the idea of being watched that the sensation had embedded itself in my mind, becoming an unwelcome companion. Doubts began to creep in. Had the man on the bench been real, or had he been a figment of my imagination, a manifestation of my fears? As the weeks passed, the intensity of the sensation began to wane, but it never disappeared entirely. I found myself double-checking the locks and curtains, hyper-aware of every sound or movement in my new home. The experience had changed me. I was more cautious, less trusting of the world around me. I avoided returning to the old park and rarely ventured out in the evenings, choosing instead to stay indoors, where I felt a semblance of safety. The man on the bench became a specter of my past, a haunting reminder of an experience that had driven me to seek a new beginning. Yet, even in my new apartment, I couldn't fully escape him. The idea of someone silently watching me, even under the guise of being a guardian, had shifted something within me. I came to realize that the feeling of being watched was no longer tied to a specific person or place. It had become part of me, a permanent change in how I perceived safety and trust. No matter how far I moved or how many locks I secured, that sense of vulnerability lingered, a mark left by the shadows of that unsettling encounter. In the end, I had moved away from the park and the mysterious man, but the emotional residue of that encounter lingered. It had changed me, teaching me to be more vigilant and to question the boundaries of security and privacy. The memory of his unsettling smile and cryptic words remained a haunting reminder of how deeply disturbing it is to feel watched, even by someone claiming to have your best interests at heart. Story 3. The first time I heard it, I dismissed it as a trick of the mind. I had recently moved into a charming but old house on the outskirts of town. The place had character, creaky wooden floors, high ceilings that made the rooms feel grand, and a quiet charm that drew me in. Living alone had been a deliberate choice, a way to find solitude and peace after an especially stressful period at work. On that first night, as I settled into my new home, I was struck by the profound silence. The usual background hum of the city felt a world away. The only sounds were the occasional creak of the house settling, perfectly normal for a structure its age. But just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint, rhythmic noise coming from somewhere in the house. At first, it was so subtle that I dismissed it. A quirk of old pipes, perhaps, or a draft sneaking through the walls. Over the next few nights, however, the sound became more distinct. It began as soft, muffled footsteps, echoing faintly through the empty rooms. The footsteps were sporadic, and each time I heard them, I got up to investigate. With a flashlight in hand, I checked every room, finding nothing out of the ordinary. The windows were securely latched, the doors locked, and the house as empty as it had been before. Yet the sound persisted. As days turned into weeks, the footsteps grew more persistent. What had started as faint, sporadic sounds now felt like deliberate pacing. Someone walking through every room of the house. The noise followed a chilling pattern, beginning in the hallway, moving to the kitchen, and then to the bedrooms, as though an unseen presence was making rounds. Nights became a source of dread, knowing I'd be kept awake by the relentless, eerie sounds. One particularly unsettling evening, as I sat watching television in the living room, the footsteps began again. At first, they were soft, but they quickly grew louder and more deliberate. It was as though they were drawing closer, making their way through the house. I paused the TV, my breath catching in my chest as I strained to listen. The footsteps continued, moving through the house with a measured, purposeful rhythm. Determined to uncover the source of the noise, I grabbed a flashlight and began a thorough search. I checked every room, every closet, every nook and cranny, but once again, I found nothing. The house was as empty as ever. I double-checked the windows and doors, convinced there had to be some logical explanation. But everything was securely locked, with no signs of forced entry or intrusion. Despite my efforts, the footsteps persisted, always just out of sight, but never ceasing entirely. It became a nightly ritual, inspecting the house from top to bottom, ensuring every lock was secured, and even adding new ones for extra peace of mind. Yet none of it seemed to help. The sounds continued, a relentless reminder that something was amiss. When I confided in friends and family, they were sympathetic but skeptical. They suggested it might be the house settling, or my imagination playing tricks on me. I wanted to believe them, to convince myself that it was nothing more than my mind overreacting to the quirks of an old house. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was there. The sounds were too consistent, too real to be dismissed so easily. One night, determined to find some explanation, I decided to stay up and document them. I placed a voice recorder in the hallway, where the footsteps were most prominent, and waited. As the hours crept by, the recorder picked up the unmistakable sound of footsteps, clear and distinct. When I played it back, my blood ran cold. Alongside the footsteps, there was a faint whispering. The words were too indistinct to understand, but their presence was undeniable. Hearing those sounds confirmed my fears. This wasn't just in my head. Desperate for answers, I contacted a local paranormal investigation group. They arrived with an array of equipment, setting up cameras and recorders throughout the house. For one long night, they monitored every corner, documenting the activity and conducting their investigation. Their findings were inconclusive. The equipment captured only the usual creaks and groans of an old house. Nothing that could definitively explain the phenomena. They left without answers, but their visit did little to ease my growing sense of dread. The footsteps persisted, as unrelenting as ever. The house became a place of constant anxiety. I started leaving lights on in every room, hoping that their glow might dispel whatever was causing the noises. I even considered moving, but the thought of uprooting my life felt overwhelming. One particularly tense night, I woke to the sound of footsteps right outside my bedroom door. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay frozen under the covers, listening to the rhythmic pacing just feet away. Gathering every ounce of courage, I finally crept to the door and peeked into the hallway. The house was empty. Yet the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway, impossibly close. Fueled by equal parts fear and determination, I decided to confront the source. Standing in the hallway, I called out, "Is someone there?" My voice reverberated in the stillness, but there was no response. The footsteps stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence that was even more unnerving. Despite my attempts to rationalize the situation, the anxiety only tightened its grip. The feeling of being watched, of an unseen presence sharing the house with me, was inescapable. I grew increasingly cautious, avoiding the darker corners of the house and spending as little time alone as possible. Then, one evening, everything changed. While rummaging through old records in the attic, I stumbled upon a weathered journal tucked away among the dusty boxes. It belonged to the house's previous owner. As I flipped through its pages, my pulse quickened. The entries detailed eerily similar experiences: phantom footsteps, an unshakable sense of being watched, and a lingering unease that pervaded the home. One entry stood out, the last one ending abruptly with a cryptic note: "The echoes of the past never truly fade." The discovery left me both unsettled and oddly comforted. While it didn't provide answers, it validated my experiences and created an invisible bond with the house's former occupant. I wasn't alone in facing the mysteries of this old home. Over time, the footsteps gradually subsided, but the house never felt entirely still. The experience left its mark, a lingering reminder of the thin veil between the known and the unknown. The creaks and whispers of the house became symbols of its age and the stories it held, leaving me more aware of the unseen layers of history within its walls. Story 4. The first sign that something was wrong came with the silence. My cat Whiskers usually greeted me the moment I stepped through the door, her soft purring and playful antics a cherished part of my daily routine. But that day, as I walked in, the house felt unnaturally still. "Whiskers," I called out, expecting her to dart around the corner, but there was no response. I searched the house thoroughly, checking all her favorite spots: under the bed, behind the curtains, even inside her usual hiding places in the closets. Whiskers was nowhere to be found. My worry quickly escalated to panic. I ventured outside, calling her name and shaking her treat bag, my voice echoing in the evening air, but she didn't appear. Hours passed with no sign of her. I decided to take action, creating flyers with her photo and a brief description, along with my contact information. I plastered them around the neighborhood, handed copies to local businesses, and spoke with my neighbors, pleading for any information about her whereabouts. Days turned into a week. My anxiety deepened with each passing hour. Tips trickled in: sightings of a similar-looking cat, distant meows heard in the night, but none led to Whiskers. Her absence left a void in the house that felt almost tangible. Each evening I returned home, hoping to find her waiting for me, her familiar warmth and energy filling the space. But every time, I was met only by the heavy weight of silence. The unanswered question of why she had disappeared consumed my thoughts. The house no longer felt like home without her presence, or where she might have gone. I held on to the hope that she would return safely, clinging to the belief that someone might find her and bring her home. Then one evening, just as I began to resign myself to her absence, I heard a faint, familiar meow outside. My heart leapt as I rushed to the door. There, sitting on the front step, was Whiskers. Relief flooded me, but it was quickly overshadowed by horror. She was clearly injured. Her fur was matted and dirty, and she moved with a noticeable limp. Her eyes, usually bright and curious, now looked dull and filled with fear. I scooped her up immediately, murmuring reassurances as I carried her inside. Carefully, I examined her injuries. She had several cuts and bruises, and her skittish behavior confirmed my fear that she'd endured something traumatic. She flinched at sudden movements and avoided my gaze, behavior I had never seen in her before. As I cleaned her wounds and gave her food and water, my worry deepened. Then, as I inspected her collar, I noticed something unusual, a small folded piece of paper attached to it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the note. It was written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, and its contents sent a shiver down my spine. She was ours for a while. The cryptic message was chilling. It suggested that someone had intentionally taken Whiskers and kept her away from me. Her injuries and the condition in which she returned hinted at possible mistreatment. My mind raced with questions. Who had taken her? Why had they kept her? And what had she endured during her time away? I contacted the local authorities immediately and showed them the note, explaining the situation and describing her injuries. They documented everything, but seemed unsure of how to proceed. With no leads and only a cryptic note, their investigation felt stalled before it even began. Following their advice, I took Whiskers to a veterinarian for a thorough examination. The vet found several bruises and minor cuts, but couldn't determine their exact cause. While Whiskers' physical injuries were concerning, it was her withdrawn demeanor that troubled me the most. Over the following weeks, I worked tirelessly to help her recover. I gave her all the love and care I could, hoping to ease her anxiety and restore her trust. But even as her wounds healed, the shadow of her experience lingered. The note haunted me, a chilling reminder of the unknown force that had briefly claimed Whiskers as their own. Though she was back home, the mystery of her disappearance and the unsettling implications of her return left an indelible mark on both of us. The trauma Whiskers had endured was evident in her behavior, but the vet assured me that with time and proper care, she would recover. They recommended a calm and supportive environment to help her adjust. Day by day, I noticed small but meaningful improvements. Whiskers began to explore her surroundings more, and gradually, her playful nature started to resurface. However, she remained cautious and easily startled, a reminder of the ordeal she had been through. Despite her progress, the mystery of her disappearance and the ominous note haunted me. The knowledge that someone had taken her and held her against her will left me feeling violated and unsettled. Determined to find answers, I took matters into my own hands, reaching out to local animal shelters, rescue groups, and even neighbors, hoping to uncover any leads about missing pets or unusual activity. Yet, as the weeks passed, the trail grew cold, and no new information emerged. The note became a constant reminder of the unknown threat that had intruded upon our lives. I tried to focus on Whiskers' recovery, but a lingering unease remained. I installed additional security measures around my home, ensuring every door and window was securely locked. The experience had heightened my vigilance, but I refused to let fear dictate our lives. With love and patience, Whiskers slowly reclaimed her place in my life. Her playful antics and affectionate purrs began to restore a sense of normalcy to our home. I showered her with attention, determined to help her heal from both the physical and emotional wounds she had endured. Though the mystery of her disappearance remained unsolved, the ordeal taught me the importance of resilience and vigilance, and above all, the value of cherishing those we love. Over time, the note that once symbolized fear became a testament to Whiskers' resilience and our unbreakable bond. Her return was bittersweet, a reminder of the unknown dangers in the world, but also a reaffirmation of the strength found in love and hope. As she nestled into her favorite spot on the couch, a profound sense of gratitude filled me. The mystery may never be resolved, but my commitment to keeping her safe and providing unwavering care would remain constant. In the end, Whiskers' journey was a testament to the power of healing, love, and perseverance, a reminder that no matter the challenges, hope can guide us through. Story 5. It was an ordinary Saturday morning when I accidentally knocked over my bathroom mirror. It shattered on the tile floor with a deafening crash, the pieces scattering like tiny glittering stars. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the shards that seemed to mock me with their cruel beauty. The mirror had been a quiet presence in my dimly lit bathroom for years, and its abrupt destruction left me feeling strangely unsettled. Cleaning up the mess was a tedious and delicate task. I carefully swept up the sharp fragments, mindful of the danger they posed, and disposed of them with a sense of finality. Once the bathroom was glass-free, I turned my attention to finding a replacement. It was an inconvenience, but hardly an insurmountable one. After some browsing online, I chose a sleek, modern mirror that I thought would suit the space perfectly. A few days later, the new mirror arrived. I opened the door to find the delivery man standing there, holding the package with a curt smile. He handed it to me without a word and hurried off, as though eager to escape. I found it odd, but shrugged it off, my attention turning to the pristine box in my hands. Inside, nestled in protective padding, was the new mirror. Alongside it was a small note from the delivery service. "Hope this one doesn't crack." The words sent an unexpected chill through me. The note's casual tone felt out of place, almost ominous. I dismissed it as a strange attempt at humor, perhaps some delivery worker's idea of a joke. Still, I couldn't quite shake the unease as I hung the mirror on the bathroom wall. At first, everything seemed fine. The new mirror was a vast improvement over the old one, making the bathroom feel brighter and more open. For a few days, I admired its flawless surface, appreciating how it transformed the space. But soon, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. Every time I looked into the mirror, it was as if something was lurking just out of sight. The reflective surface seemed deeper than it should be, almost like a window rather than a mirror. Whenever I caught my own reflection, a chill would run down my spine. It felt as though unseen eyes were watching me from the other side. I tried to brush off the sensation, reasoning that it was just my imagination running wild. After all, the recent shock of breaking the old mirror had left me on edge. Yet no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the discomfort persisted. It wasn't just the reflection, it was the silence that seemed to hum in the room when I stood before the mirror. A silence that felt alive, pressing against me like an unseen presence. I began to avoid the bathroom, unless absolutely necessary, but the feeling followed me, lurking in the edges of my mind. The sleek, modern mirror that had once seemed like a simple fix now felt like something far more sinister. And deep down, I couldn't shake the thought, what if the old mirror hadn't broken by accident? I found myself avoiding the bathroom entirely. On the rare occasions I had to go in, I would avert my gaze from the mirror, unwilling to meet its reflection. The sensation of being watched grew stronger with each passing day, a gnawing unease that I couldn't shake. I couldn't stop thinking about the shards of the old mirror. Despite my careful cleaning, I knew some fragments must have escaped my notice. Could those remnants somehow be tied to the strange feelings I was experiencing? Or was it something more? My thoughts kept returning to the note that had accompanied the new mirror, innocuous on the surface, but with a tone I couldn't quite dismiss. One evening, after a particularly unsettling day, I decided to investigate further. Armed with a flashlight, I examined the area where the old mirror had once hung. The tile floor appeared spotless, but in a corner of the room, I noticed a small, dark smudge I hadn't seen before. It looked like it could have been a remnant of shattered glass, or perhaps just a stain. I crouched down to inspect it, shining the flashlight directly on the spot. It seemed harmless, a faint discoloration on the grout. Still, I decided to clean the area thoroughly. I grabbed the vacuum cleaner with a nozzle attachment and meticulously went over every crevice of the bathroom floor. I even checked the wall where the old mirror had hung, but it was solid and undisturbed. Despite my efforts, my mind kept circling back to that note. Was it just a bad joke or something more sinister? The thought lingered, filling me with dread. That night, I was plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams. Shadows moved behind the mirror, eyes stared at me from the glass, unblinking and cold. When I woke up, drenched in sweat, the discomfort of the dreams clung to me, spilling over into my waking hours. Desperate for answers, I reached out to friends and family, explaining the situation. The note, the strange sensations, and my growing unease. But they dismissed my fears, chalking it up to an overactive imagination stirred by the stress of breaking the old mirror. Unwilling to let it go, I decided to contact a local paranormal investigator. It felt drastic, but I needed someone to take my fears seriously. When I explained the situation to them, including the note and my persistent unease, they seemed intrigued and agreed to visit my home. When the investigator arrived, they conducted a thorough examination of the bathroom and the new mirror. Using electromagnetic readers, thermal scanners, and other tools, they searched for anything out of the ordinary. I watched anxiously as they worked, hoping they'd uncover some logical explanation, or even an illogical one if it meant an end to the tension. Finally, the investigator concluded their inspection. "There's nothing unusual here," they said. "The mirror is just a mirror. Whatever you're feeling, it's not coming from this." Their reassurance should have brought me peace, but it didn't. Despite the lack of evidence, the sense of being watched remained, lurking just beneath the surface of my awareness. Even as I tried to convince myself that the unease was in my head, I couldn't ignore the weight of my lingering discomfort. The mirror stayed on the wall, its pristine surface reflecting the room back at me. But no matter how often I told myself it was harmless, I still felt as though something or someone was watching. Whenever I looked into the mirror, I couldn't shake the lingering unease. The investigator suggested that my discomfort stemmed from the psychological impact of the incident, amplified by the unsettling note. Their theory resonated with me, and I resolved to confront the issue head-on. I made a conscious effort to use the bathroom regularly, deliberately facing the mirror rather than avoiding it. I also sought distractions, activities that occupied my mind and eased my lingering anxieties. Over time, the intensity of my fear began to fade, though it never disappeared entirely. The new mirror remained a subtle source of discomfort, but I learned to manage my anxiety. Gradually, I approached the reflective surface with more confidence. I decided to keep the ominous note and remnants of the shattered mirror in a box, a tangible reminder of the strange experience. The incident taught me a valuable lesson about the power of suggestion and the way our fears can distort our perceptions. While the mirror itself was not inherently sinister, the combination of a broken past and the cryptic message had created an environment ripe for unease. Ultimately, I learned to confront my fears and accept that sometimes the most unsettling experiences are shaped by the mind itself. Inheriting the old house from a distant relative was an unexpected twist of fate. The sprawling Victorian mansion, perched at the edge of a quiet town, had been in the family for generations. Though I'd never seen it before, the estate was left to me after my great-uncle's passing. Intrigued, I decided to escape my hectic life and explore the property, curious about its history and potential. The mansion was both grand and melancholic, with creaking wooden floors and dusty, ornate furnishings that whispered of a bygone era. As I wandered through its rooms, I felt a growing fascination with its untold stories and the mysteries it seemed to hold. One afternoon, while exploring, I ventured into the attic. The dimly lit space was vast, cluttered with forgotten relics, old trunks, and thick cobwebs. It felt like stepping into another time. Amid the chaos, I noticed a peculiar door, tucked behind a stack of faded drapes and trunks. The door was unlike any other in the house. Its solid construction and heavy bolts set it apart. Strangely, the bolting mechanism was on the inside, as though someone had once secured the room from within. My curiosity was piqued. What could be hidden behind such an impenetrable barrier? A secret? A treasure? Or perhaps something else entirely? Determined to uncover the truth, I set to work unraveling the mystery of the hidden door. I tried to pry open the door using every tool I could find, but my efforts were in vain. The bolts were unyielding, their stubbornness thwarting even my most determined attempts. Frustrated, I decided to call a locksmith, hoping their expertise would finally unlock the secrets concealed behind the door. When the locksmith arrived, I led him to the attic and pointed out the peculiar door. He examined the bolting mechanism with a critical eye, his movements deliberate and practiced. As he worked, his tools clinked softly against the metal, the sound filling the otherwise silent attic. He made small talk, but I was too distracted to engage, my mind racing with possibilities of what might be hidden beyond the door. Excitement and unease coursed through me as I watched him work. After nearly an hour of meticulous effort, the locksmith finally stepped back and wiped his brow. "All right," he said, gesturing to the handle. "Let's see what's inside." With a turn of the handle and a gentle push, the door creaked open. I held my breath as I peered into the room, but to my astonishment, it was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes. There wasn't even a speck of dust. The room was as barren as the day it was built, its stark emptiness almost unsettling. The locksmith frowned, clearly puzzled. "That's strange," he remarked. "It's as if nothing was ever kept in here." I nodded but said nothing, a growing sense of dread settling over me. The absence of anything in the room felt profoundly wrong, like a void that carried a presence of its own. The silence inside was deafening, echoing off the bare walls in an almost accusatory way. The locksmith, sensing my unease, quickly packed up his tools and left. I stayed behind, staring into the emptiness, the chill in the attic seeming to seep into my bones. There was something off about the room, something I couldn't quite articulate, but it lingered with me long after I closed the door. In the days that followed, I became consumed by the mystery. I searched the house from top to bottom, combing through dusty boxes, old papers, and forgotten corners, hoping to uncover a journal or letter that might explain why the room had been sealed so tightly. But the house offered no answers, only silence. Then the strange occurrences began. Late at night, I would hear creaks and groans emanating from the attic, as if something was moving within the empty room. Footsteps echoed through the house, faint but distinct, yet every time I investigated, I found nothing. The sense of being watched became inescapable, a heavy, oppressive feeling that followed me everywhere. Determined to uncover the truth, I turned to the local historical society, hoping to learn more about the house's past. I spoke to elderly townsfolk, asking about my great-uncle and the mansion's history. The more I dug, the more unsettling whispers I unearthed. Rumors of previous owners who had abandoned the house, strange happenings that no one could explain, and a lingering reputation of misfortune tied to the property. The house, it seemed, was not just a relic of a bygone era. It was a vessel for secrets that refused to be forgotten. And the empty room, it felt less and less like a blank space and more like a void waiting to be filled. Occupants who had vanished under strange circumstances and tales of unexplained phenomena only deepened my unease. One evening, while exploring the attic again, I noticed something unusual. The floorboards in front of the locked room appeared slightly disturbed, as if they had recently been moved. Intrigued, I carefully pried up a few of the boards, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside the compartment were old leather-bound books and yellowed papers, all meticulously organized. As I sifted through the contents, I found correspondence and legal documents, but none provided clear answers about the room or its purpose. The more I delved into the materials, the stronger my sense of foreboding grew. The documents hinted at legal disputes, cryptic transactions, and references to individuals whose names were entirely unfamiliar. There were no direct mentions of the locked room, yet an air of secrecy and hidden motives permeated every page. The deeper I went, the more I felt as though I was unraveling a story that was never meant to be uncovered. The locked room, the strange occurrences, and the enigmatic documents wove together into a tapestry of dread and confusion. I felt trapped in a web of mystery, with answers perpetually just out of reach. Though the room was physically empty, it seemed to hold an intangible, unsettling presence. It became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that some secrets are meant to remain hidden, no matter how desperately one seeks to uncover them. As I packed my belongings and prepared to leave the house for good, the locked room lingered in my thoughts, a haunting enigma. The dread that had followed me throughout my investigation refused to fade. The house, with its layered history and hidden corners, would continue to guard its secrets, and the empty room, it would remain a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lay behind closed doors. Story 7. It began with a simple phone call. I was lounging in my living room on a quiet Tuesday night when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and I hesitated before answering. It was past midnight, and the timing felt odd. Still, I reasoned it might be a wrong number or a late-night scam. "Hello?" I said, my voice breaking the stillness of the room. Only silence greeted me. The faint crackle of static occasionally punctuated the void, but no one spoke. After a few moments, the call ended, leaving me with an uneasy feeling. The next night, at precisely midnight, the same number appeared on my screen. I answered again, and once more, there was only silence. I strained to listen, hoping for any clue, but all I heard was the faint hum of static. A chill ran through me as I hung up, trying to dismiss it as a prank or an automated call. But the calls continued. Night after night, always at the same time, the number would appear and I would answer, only to be met with the same eerie silence. My anxiety grew with each passing night. Sleep became elusive, and the once quiet comfort of my home began to feel oppressive. It felt like a sinister game, one in which I was an unwilling participant. Despite my efforts to rationalize the situation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. One night, as I answered the call, I finally heard something. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper. A whisper-like voice finally shattered the silence. "I know where you are." The chilling words sent a jolt of fear coursing through me. My heart pounded as the call abruptly ended, leaving the sinister message echoing in my mind. I tried to steady my breathing, but the unease lingered. Desperate for answers, I attempted to trace the number, hoping to uncover some clue about the caller's identity. To my frustration, the number was untraceable. No records, no information, as if the calls had never existed. The lack of answers only deepened my anxiety. How could I protect myself when I had no idea who was behind these unnerving calls? Over the next few nights, my paranoia grew. I tried to stay awake, determined to catch the caller in the act, but exhaustion would eventually overcome me. The calls came with unnerving regularity, always at midnight, as though the caller was following some grim ritual. The words, "I know where you are," echoed relentlessly in my thoughts, making it impossible to focus on anything else. I considered changing my phone number, but the fear that the caller might find another way to reach me held me back. I began taking extra precautions, locking all doors and windows, installing additional security measures, and checking my surroundings every time I left or returned home. Yet no matter how vigilant I was, I couldn't shake the oppressive feeling of being watched. One particularly sleepless night, I sat alone in my dimly lit living room, clutching my phone as the hour approached midnight. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Then, as the clock struck 12, the phone rang. My heart raced as I answered, the silence on the other end more deafening than ever. Then, the whisper came again, "I know where you are." This time, there was more. Beneath the whispered words, I heard faint background noises, murmured voices, the rustling of papers, or perhaps something else. I strained to discern the sounds, but they were too faint and distorted to identify. Before I could react, the call ended abruptly, leaving me more unsettled than ever. Desperate for help, I reached out to the police. I explained everything: the calls, the eerie message, the untraceable number. They listened attentively and took my report seriously, assuring me they would investigate. Yet even with their involvement, the unease persisted. The words, "I know where you are," clung to me like a shadow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the caller's game was far from over. The police advised me to document any further calls and remain vigilant. While their reassurance was appreciated, it did little to quell the anxiety that had taken root. The oppressive feeling of being stalked and observed lingered, like a shadow, just out of sight. The calls continued for several more nights, their regularity adding to my unease. Then, just as abruptly as they had begun, they stopped. The midnight rings ceased, and silence took its place. The relief I felt was fleeting, replaced quickly by a new kind of anxiety. Though the unsettling messages were gone, the fear that someone had been watching me, knowing my every move, remained. The lingering sense of paranoia made it impossible to feel truly safe in my own home. I kept the extra security measures in place and stayed hyper-aware of my surroundings. Despite the absence of the calls, I couldn't shake the sense that someone might still be out there, unseen, yet present. The experience left a lasting mark. It was a stark reminder of how fragile our sense of security can be and how quickly it can be shattered. Looking back, I often found myself obsessing over the identity and motives of the caller. Who were they? What did they want? Why had they chosen me? The lack of answers only deepened the unease that clung to me long after the calls had stopped. The fear of being watched or followed became a constant presence in my life, a lingering shadow I couldn't entirely escape. Though the midnight calls were gone, their psychological impact endured. The whisper, "I know where you are," echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain. In time, I adapted, learning to be more cautious and vigilant. But the memory of those nights served as a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we are to the unknown. Story 8. The Watchful Neighbor. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, I noticed my elderly neighbor, Mr. Thompson, casting occasional glances toward my windows. He lived next door in a quaint, weathered house that bore the marks of decades gone by. At first, his behavior seemed innocuous. I would notice him standing by his window or tending to his garden, his gaze occasionally drifting toward my house. Initially, I dismissed it as the harmless curiosity of an elderly neighbor, perhaps the idle musings of someone with too much time on his hands. But as time passed, his behavior grew more unsettling. His glances became frequent, almost deliberate. Whenever I caught him staring, he would quickly avert his eyes, pretending to busy himself with some task. A poorly executed charade that only heightened my discomfort. One evening, as I sat in my living room, I spotted him through the small gap in my partially open blinds. He was standing outside his front door, his eyes fixed on my window with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. My heart raced as unease gave way to anger. Determined to address the situation, I marched over to his porch, my nerves frayed and my pulse pounding. "Mr. Thompson," I called out as I approached. He looked up, startled, his expression a mix of surprise and guilt. "Is there something I can help you with? I've noticed you've been looking into my windows quite a bit lately." His response was a flurry of apologies. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. I didn't mean to intrude or cause any concern." I tried to gauge his sincerity. "Then why have you been watching my house? It feels like you're monitoring me." He shuffled his feet, avoiding my gaze. His demeanor shifted from apologetic to defensive. "I assure you, it's nothing like that. I've just been worried about you. I see you're home alone a lot, and with all the recent news about break-ins, I just wanted to make sure you were safe." His explanation felt hollow, a thin veneer of concern over something more invasive. While I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, the persistent feeling of being watched had already taken its toll. His reassurances did little to calm my anxiety. In the days that followed, his behavior didn't change. Every time I glanced outside, there he was, either in his yard or peering from his window. His supposed gardening or home repairs felt like thin excuses to remain outside, maintaining his watchful vigil. The situation began to erode my sense of security. Simple activities, lounging on the couch, preparing a meal, felt exposed, as though I were on display. I found myself checking the windows constantly, peeking through the blinds to see if he was watching. The oppressive awareness of his gaze made me feel trapped in my own home. What had once been a safe haven now felt like a cage, and the unease was beginning to take its toll. I decided to install heavier blinds and curtains in both my living room and bedrooms, hoping to create a physical barrier against Mr. Thompson's intrusive gaze. While the curtains offered some sense of control, the lingering unease remained. His prying eyes seemed to infiltrate my thoughts, making it impossible to feel truly at ease in my own home. I even contemplated rearranging my living spaces or spending more time in other parts of the house, but the sense of invasion followed me everywhere. One afternoon, determined to address the issue directly, I decided to confront him again. With a mixture of resolve and apprehension, I approached his house. My heart raced as I knocked on his door, unsure of how he would respond this time. He answered with a wary expression, his face marked by an air of guilt and defensiveness. "I need to talk to you again," I began, trying to keep my voice calm and steady despite my nerves. "I'm still feeling very uncomfortable with how often you seem to be looking into my windows. This isn't just about safety, it's about my privacy. Your actions are making me feel unsafe in my own home." Mr. Thompson's face fell, and he appeared genuinely distressed. "I'm truly sorry," he said, his voice laced with regret. "I didn't realize I was making you feel this way. It's just, I've lived in this neighborhood for so long, and I've seen so many things happen. I suppose I've become overly cautious." While his words conveyed concern, they did little to ease the discomfort that had taken root in my life. His actions, even if unintentionally invasive, had created an atmosphere where I felt trapped between his well-meaning intentions and my need for personal space. "I appreciate your concern," I said firmly, "but I need you to respect my boundaries. Please refrain from looking into my windows. It's making me very uncomfortable, and I need to feel secure in my home." He nodded solemnly, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. "I understand," he murmured. "I'll do my best to keep my distance." I hoped that would be the end of it, but the unease persisted. Despite his assurances, the feeling of being observed lingered, a shadow that tainted even the most mundane aspects of my daily life. Taking additional measures, I decided to further protect my privacy and security. I began keeping a detailed log of any unusual occurrences, documenting instances where I noticed Mr. Thompson's presence near my home. I also reached out to other neighbors, curious to see if they had observed any peculiar behavior. The feedback was mixed. Some neighbors admitted they had noticed Mr. Thompson's habit of watching others, though they dismissed it as harmless eccentricity. Others seemed unaware, brushing it off as typical behavior for an older man living alone. Feeling that I needed to take stronger action, I began exploring other ways to reclaim my sense of safety. Because while Mr. Thompson's intentions might not have been malicious, the impact on my life was undeniable. I sought advice from a local community support group who provided practical guidance on handling situations with invasive neighbors. They emphasized the importance of documenting every occurrence to build a comprehensive picture of the situation. They also suggested keeping lines of communication open with local law enforcement in case further action became necessary. Months went by, and while Mr. Thompson's behavior seemed to become less intrusive, the sense of being watched never completely faded. It served as a constant reminder of the fine line between neighborly concern and personal privacy. I remained vigilant, aware of the delicate balance between addressing the situation and preserving a sense of security in my own home. Ultimately, the experience taught me an invaluable lesson about asserting personal boundaries and advocating for my own well-being. It also illuminated the complexities of human interactions, where even well-meaning actions can unintentionally breach the comfort of others. Though the situation appeared to resolve itself, the echoes of that unsettling period lingered, a lasting reminder of how vital personal privacy is to our sense of safety and peace of mind. Story 9. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. I first noticed something strange with my home security system one evening while checking the live feed on my phone. The usually crisp, clear images of my home had been replaced by odd, distorted visuals. The cameras flickered between angles, showing bizarre, overlapping scenes of rooms and hallways that didn't make sense. At first, I chalked it up to a temporary glitch or a minor technical hiccup. But as days went by, the problem persisted and grew more unnerving with each passing moment. The footage sometimes displayed brief flashes of movement where there shouldn't have been any, and the distortion seemed almost deliberate, as if someone or something was tampering with it. Concerned, I contacted the security company. A technician arrived promptly and spent several hours inspecting the system. He checked the wiring, recalibrated the cameras, and updated the software. "Everything is in order now," he assured me confidently. "The issue should be resolved." But it wasn't. I felt a fleeting sense of relief, but it was short-lived. The next day, as I reviewed the footage from the previous night, my unease returned in full force. The recordings showed scenes from my home, but something was undeniably off. The images were distorted, as though viewed through a warped lens. Furniture appeared strangely out of place, and shadows seemed to shift and move in unnatural ways. The most chilling discovery was the presence of a figure moving around my home while I was away. At first, it was barely noticeable, a fleeting shadow or a blurry shape. But as I replayed the footage, clearer instances emerged. A vague silhouette could be seen moving deliberately, exploring my living room, kitchen, and even my bedroom. My heart raced as the horrifying realization sank in. Someone had been inside my home, violating my private space. I immediately contacted the security company again, describing the unsettling footage and the ongoing problems. They sent another technician who appeared genuinely baffled by the situation. He replaced some hardware and ran extensive diagnostics, but found no definitive cause for the malfunctions. He assured me that the system should now be functioning properly. But it wasn't. The strange distortions and eerie images continued, and my trust in the system eroded further. Feeling increasingly desperate, I hired an independent security consultant to investigate. The consultant meticulously examined the setup, combing through every detail for signs of tampering or interference. He couldn't find anything conclusive, but suggested the possibility of external interference, such as a third-party device or a sophisticated hacking attempt. The idea that someone might have gained access to my system remotely was terrifying. Despite the consultant's thorough efforts, the issues persisted. The distorted footage and unsettling images refused to stop, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. My once secure home now felt like a labyrinth of unknown threats, and I could no longer trust the system meant to protect me. The system's malfunction had left me in a heightened state of hyper-awareness. I found myself constantly checking and rechecking the cameras, but the sense of being watched never truly faded. My sense of security had been deeply shaken. Every little noise made me jump, and every shadow seemed suspicious. The thought that someone might have intruded on my private moments gnawed at me, and I began to wonder if I was being deliberately targeted, or if something even more sinister was at play. Desperate to regain control, I installed additional locks and security measures throughout my home. I started carrying a personal alarm and took extra precautions whenever I left or returned. Despite these steps, the psychological toll of the malfunctioning system weighed heavily on me. What was once a source of reassurance had transformed into a source of dread. The distorted images and the thought that someone had been monitoring me haunted my every move. The feeling of being watched cast a shadow over my daily life, making it difficult to focus or feel at ease. Over time, I tried to adapt to my new reality. I kept the security system running, though my trust in its reliability was severely diminished. Instead, I focused on maintaining a heightened sense of awareness and doing everything I could to safeguard my home. Eventually, the security company offered to replace the entire system, but the damage had already been done. Even with new equipment, the lingering sense of vulnerability remained. The experience had left a mark on my psyche, a constant reminder that no security system, no matter how advanced, is infallible. The distorted footage and the eerie possibility of surveillance revealed the fragility of personal security. The unsettling realization that safety is never fully guaranteed lingered in the corners of my mind like a shadow. In the end, the ordeal taught me the importance of vigilance and proactive measures in protecting my home and personal life. Though the physical security measures were eventually restored, the psychological scars from the intrusion remained. It served as a stark reminder to always be aware and prepared for the unexpected in a world where even our most trusted systems can fail us. Story 10. The doorbell rang unexpectedly one quiet afternoon, pulling me away from my work. I wasn't expecting visitors or any deliveries, which made the sudden chime feel more ominous than usual. When I opened the door, a small plain package sat on the doormat. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with simple twine, and bore no return address or identifying details. My heart quickened as I picked it up. The package was unusually light, and its anonymity heightened my apprehension. I carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter, the stillness of the house amplifying my unease. With trembling hands, I untied the twine and peeled away the paper. Inside was a neat stack of photographs, secured with a rubber band. The images were of my house, taken from various angles and at different times of the day. Some were from the front yard, others from the street, and a few from behind the house. Each photograph was disturbingly detailed, capturing intimate aspects of my property. The garden, the arrangement of furniture on the porch, and even the small shed in the backyard. As I flipped through the pictures, my unease deepened. These were not casual snapshots. They had been taken deliberately. The careful composition and varied perspectives suggested an unsettling level of observation, as though someone had been studying my home for weeks or longer. At the bottom of the package was a single piece of paper. A handwritten note, scrawled in hurried, uneven script, read, "You should have been more careful." The message sent a chill through me. Its cryptic tone was menacing, and its brevity left no room for interpretation. Someone had been watching me. Someone had gone out of their way to send this ominous warning. I stood frozen, staring at the note, trying to make sense of what it could mean. Was it a threat? A warning? A sick joke? My thoughts raced as I replayed recent events, searching for anything unusual or suspicious that could explain this invasion of my privacy. The implications were terrifying. Whoever had sent the package knew my address, my routines, and the layout of my home. The photographs were proof of how closely they had been watching. Feeling exposed and vulnerable, I quickly checked the locks on all the doors and windows, pulling the blinds shut. my sense of safety was shattered. I debated calling the police, but hesitated, unsure of what they could do with so little evidence. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a fragile barrier against an unseen threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever sent the package might still be watching, hidden just out of sight, waiting for my reaction. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, sent my heart racing. The photographs and note remained on the counter, a tangible reminder of the unseen menace that had intruded into my life. Days passed, but no further messages arrived. The silence brought little comfort, as the absence of answers only deepened the mystery. The cryptic warning lingered in my mind. You should have been more careful. What had I done to attract such attention? And who was the person behind the camera? The unanswered questions left a permanent mark, transforming my life into one of constant vigilance. My home, once a haven, had become a prison of paranoia and uncertainty. Who sent the package? My mind raced with possibilities as I tried to decipher who might have sent the package and why. Was it an unhappy acquaintance, a cruel prank, or something far more sinister? No matter how I rationalized it, the oppressive feeling of being watched and scrutinized refused to leave me. I contacted the local police immediately, hoping they could trace the package or provide some insight into its origins. Officers arrived promptly, taking the package and photographs for further examination. They dusted for fingerprints and inspected the materials for any identifying marks, but their efforts yielded no conclusive evidence. The absence of a return address or distinguishing details made tracing the sender almost impossible. The police assured me they would monitor for similar incidents and advised me to remain vigilant. Despite their reassurances, their inability to offer concrete answers left me feeling profoundly helpless. The package had confirmed my worst fears. Someone was indeed watching me, but it had provided no clues to explain why or who. As days turned into weeks, paranoia settled over me like a heavy fog. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, double-checking locks and ensuring windows were secure. Every unexpected sound sent my nerves on edge, each creak or rustle sparking a fear that someone was nearby. The photographs became an object of fixation. Hoping for answers, I pinned them to a corkboard and scrutinized each image for patterns or hidden details. But no matter how much I examined them, they revealed nothing beyond the mundane features of my home, details that only made their existence more chilling. Desperate for a sense of normalcy, I threw myself into my daily routines, but the ever-present feeling of being watched made relaxation impossible. Every trip outside felt like a performance under an unseen audience's gaze. I began avoiding open windows and looking over my shoulder, my paranoia warping every interaction into a potential threat. One night, as I was preparing for bed, I noticed a fleeting shadow outside my window. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, then cautiously peered through the glass. The yard was still and empty, with no sign of anyone nearby. Yet the unease was undeniable. Shortly after, anonymous phone calls began. The calls were brief and silent, always arriving at odd hours and ending the moment I picked up. They mirrored the unsettling nature of the package, silent, intrusive, and deeply unnerving. I started to question my sanity. Were these events real, or was my fear distorting reality? Seeking clarity, I turned to a therapist. They listened attentively and offered practical advice, but my fear and anxiety remained firmly rooted. The therapist suggested I focus on what I could control, but even that felt impossible in the shadow of the unknown. Weeks passed, and the police sent a letter informing me they had made no progress in the investigation. The polite yet disappointing message echoed my own feelings of frustration and helplessness. Although the acute fear began to fade with time, the unease never truly left. The package and its ominous message lingered in my mind, an indelible reminder of how easily the sense of safety can be shattered. I tried to move on, forcing myself to reclaim normalcy, but the breach of my privacy left scars that refused to heal. Even now, I remain hyper-vigilant, my perception forever shaped by that small, unassuming package. It was more than a simple delivery. It was a haunting symbol of vulnerability and the unsettling reality that someone, somewhere, had been watching.